It's time to get the story behind the story. Interviews with newsmakers, news breakers, and Vermonters making a difference. WCAX presents 802 News with Mark Johnson. Here's Mark.
Amanda Janoo was so distressed about the well-being of the country, including Vermont, that she decided she had to take action. That's why she entered the race for governor. In this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company, the 38-year-old policy analyst who grew up in South Stratford and now lives in Burlington discusses why she supports raising taxes on the wealthy to fund free primary health care, and how economists like her focus less on statistics like the gross domestic product and more on indicators like the health of the environment and its people when measuring how well a society is doing. Janoo faces Allie Richards, who ran the child care advocacy group Let's Grow Kids for the Democratic Party nomination. The primary is in August. We'll begin our discussion in a moment after a word from our sponsor. Big changes these days at Red Hen Baking Company. They just opened the doors at their new establishment in downtown Montpelier, a move customers have long requested. There's plenty of parking, and the pastries and other delights like sandwiches and salads have never been tastier. You can order online or just head in. Red Hen bread is also available at many other fine grocery stores throughout Vermont. At Red Hen Baking Company, Randy, George, and Eliza Kane focus on quality. Stop in soon to their new location on Main Street in the capital city. When did you decide to run for governor?
I'd say late last fall. So last year, I've always been an optimist, and I started to flirt with some nihilism, and I was feeling just like an intense level of anxiety about our political situation, like nationally and here in the state. You know, all roads seem to be leading to like World War III. Our country's been taken over by a bunch of sociopaths who are trying to create some AI military dictatorship. And then, at the state level, we've got a governor right now who's like holding the legislature hostage over forced school consolidation while our healthcare system's collapsing and, our communities are hollowed out because nobody can afford to live here. And so, I sort of hit a moment where I was like, we're the people we're waiting for. And so decided to step up, run for governor. And it's helped, I would say, a lot, the doing, the action, the trying to try to advance like a much more bold, transformative vision for our state and use the campaign also as a way to bring people together right now.
You have to go back to the 1960s here in Vermont for somebody to have been successful running for governor who didn't go through the legislature and learn the process. Mm-hmm. Why do you feel that that's not necessary?
I would say we're in a moment right now where I think there is a lot of distrust, I would say, of government and cynicism around politicians and a sense of a desire for like more systemic transformation within like our economy, within our governance systems. And I think sometimes it's helpful to have somebody who isn't as embedded within the existing institutional process to be able to bring a different perspective to that and to be able to speak honestly to what is possible. But also, my background is I've spent my career working with the executive branch of government, so much more that side of it as opposed to the legislative side. And so I have a better sense, I would say, of like, mid-level civil servants are my favorite, like they're what give me faith in government. There's just folks trying to help out, and so that side I feel more comfortable with as well, like running for a more executive oriented seat as opposed to coming through the legislative side. I think the big downside for me is just I don't know how to campaign, right? Like, so that's the side. Like, I think I would be good at the job. I don't know if I'm doing a great job at campaigning, but it seems like, people are jazzed.
Well, I want to get to the organization you've been working for, but let's stick with that point you just made. I've watched a lot of the commentaries that you've done. I've read quite a bit about you in the past week or so. You're talking at a level about the economy and ideas that I just wonder how you get that across in basically 2.5 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
you're talking about like restructuring an economy, doing an economy without, GDP, gross domestic product. Those are pretty complex ideas. So how do you get that across and get people to understand that in 2.5 months to the primary?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't think it's that hard because everybody's struggling so much economically right now. So there is already a very intuitive understanding of, our broken healthcare system or housing system, jobs, prospects, all of this. And so you just need to speak to people where they are at and offer a vision of an alternative of ways in which, let's say with healthcare, I think people are at a point where they recognize like a profit-oriented healthcare system is not a good idea, right? Like it's a perverse incentive to have an industry that makes money off of people being sick. Whereas if we all pay into that system through taxes, like we all have an incentive for people to be well so that we don't have to pay so much for, doctor's visits and medications, et cetera. And so that sort of idea, it's like, yes, that's a big transformation, but it's already here. People in Vermont really we've already passed, right? Like legislation that to advance a universal healthcare system. And so speaking, I think, to the everyday manifestations of the problems in our economy and then offering a concrete solution to move forward.
10 years ago, Governor Peter Shumlin wanted to institute a universal single-payer plan, ultimately decided that the economics of it just didn't work. There weren't enough people to be paying in to make the system work, and he abandoned it. And I would dare say that he would have done anything to have been able to make that happen in terms of his legacy. So, and healthcare costs have done nothing but go up since then. Vermont's population hasn't. I know you've talked about, maybe you could have just addressed that part first.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's partially why we haven't tried to make much progress on it recently, because I think a lot of people were really burned by that, right? Like they had a lot of hope. They, organized and supported Shumlin's election on the promise of universal health care. And then when that didn't actually come to fruition, there was so much deep disappointment and sort of distrust as well, I think, within government's capacity to really deliver on its promises. And so I think part of it was also he didn't really do the financial analysis when he was running, right? And so sort of waited until he was in office and then realized the payroll tax that would be necessary would be politically unfeasible. For me, I've been part of this coalition called Fund Vermont's Future, which looks at like reform of the Vermont tax structure in order to ensure greater equity and also government revenue. And so one of the proposals we've been trying to advance is this fair share proposal, which is a income surcharge on the top 1% of income earners in Vermont. And I just have based this, like my proposal, off of the potential revenue from that as a way to show, at least what we can do as a starting point is universal primary preventative care. And like our towns many of them are already doing it. Like in Tunbridge, they've just hired their own town nurse who can provide free healthcare to anybody, do house visits, etc. And I think that's the model, like that's the Vermont model. Like if we bring back small town doctors and nurses and like health clinics that are free for anybody to all of our communities, that's the first starting point of making sure everybody has access to like good primary preventative healthcare. I'll be honest, looking at our budget, like a big motivation for me as well is like 30% of our budget comes from the federal government right now, and most of it is for healthcare. And I do not want us to end up capitulating to the federal government right now on the basis of budgetary considerations. So I want to make sure we have a state-funded, universal, like healthcare system. In order to get to a full universal one that would cover hospitals as well, honestly, I can't see in our budget how we could do it immediately. But if we partnered with some other states, for example, we could get there.
What is your estimate of what it would cost to do universal primary preventative care?
Yeah, and it depends on what different types of services are included. So the proposal that I've put forth is based on, the higher percentage surcharge. And it's an estimate of about like $360 60 million, but that would include not only primary care providers, mental health, like providers, admin, physicians assistants who are paid an annual salary by the state, but also relocation incentives for our rural communities, as well as clinic rehabilitation grants. So if you have a building, right, like that you want to rehab basic equipment and even basic pharmaceuticals, like for asthma or diabetes or hypertension, that kind of thing. And that's like the largest amount. But the estimated savings for the state are $300 million if we had a universal primary care. Because otherwise, right now, people are going to emergency rooms, which puts a huge amount of stress on it. They're waiting much longer to go see doctors or get care. And so in the end, it's like we spend some now and we will save much more later.
The estimates that I've seen, you've talked about this surcharge on the state income tax for people that are higher earners, 500,000 and up. Yeah. So if you did 3% on 500,000 and then an additional 2% on people that were over $1 million, the estimate I've seen is 170 million. That's far short of the number you just told me for. So where would the difference come from?
I mean, the one that I proposed was based on, we had these different scenarios within the Fair Share Coalition that we brought to the legislature and we've been bringing over the last few years. And so the one that I was basing it off of is like a higher percentage surcharge. So I think it was at 6% as opposed to like the 3%.
Okay, I got the 3% off of your website.
The Fair Share proposal?
No, well, the 3% surcharge I got from your site.
For the 500 million and then 6% for the above $1 million?
500,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that I can show you the table. I think on the website it's a much more reduced sort of analysis of the expected different types of costs and how that adds up to the different areas that we could provide. And I know that right now there were two different bills that were also coming through the House, one that was being brought by the Progressives and one that was being brought by the Democrats. And the one that's currently in the House is much lower. So I think we would be able to at least cover the primary care providers' salaries themselves, even if we couldn't cover all of the other aspects of it as well.
Well, the Democratic-controlled legislature has now, for all intents and purposes, abandoned that because they're concerned about the backlash, higher taxes on wealthy people, potential wealth flight. How would you, as governor, as a Democrat, be able to convince the Democratic legislature they could do that?
So this was one of the more disappointing. There have been many disappointing, I would say, aspects of this year's legislative session. But there was that moment where they were, like Monique Priestley, Esme Cole, were bringing it as a floor amendment to the miscellaneous tax bill, and they had the votes. Like, the majority of the representatives were going to vote yes for it, and then they sort of whipped it to go into the Ways and Means Committee again. It is very popular. And even within the legislature, I think when that happened, so many people were calling their representatives that's why they ended up bringing it back to the Ways and Means Committee. Often, I think the argument is that Phil Scott's going to veto it anyways. So what's even the point of trying? So my hope would be, right, if we have a different governor in office and you have people really calling for this type of shift in policy, that would be sufficient for passing it.
Phil Scott, let's assume he runs 70% plus approval rating. I've talked to you about trying to explain some of these ideas that you have that are more complex. How do you defeat somebody with 70% popularity? And I think a lot of his popularity comes from people feeling that he provides a check on the legislature.
Yeah. I think in the end, one of the things that Phil Scott's been really good at, right, is sort of saying any of our issues are because of the legislature. But the reality is during his tenure, like we went from having, about average healthcare costs nationally to now having the highest premiums in the country. We've gone from, our like homelessness rate has exploded, our housing crisis, like the average price of homes has more than doubled. There's so many different aspects, I think, right now that even with energy, right? Like he's not been a friend to renewable energy. And in this moment where gas prices are so expensive and we need to really be shifting to more community solar, that is something where he has made it very difficult for communities and impossible actually in terms of metering to be able to shift to that. And so I think there's a lot of different aspects that feel more urgent right now to people that he has just not been a leader on. I think somebody was saying the entire tenure of his governorship, he's only released like one memo on healthcare, right? And like that is the major crisis we're facing right now. And I think there's an opportunity here and a need. We just have to like take some more bold and swift action to get to the root causes of this.
Do you blame him for the increase in healthcare costs, the increase in homelessness, and the other things that you listed?
I mean, I think that it's been during his tenure as governor, and that the point of having a governor is to be able to provide and support with the agenda setting and the prioritization, and that those should have been the priorities these last few years, if not longer. I mean, healthcare for sure this whole time, and ever since COVID. I mean, he was the one who was providing payments for people to come move here from out of state. And then we had so many people move here during COVID, and it didn't provide the economic boom. It caused a housing crisis, right? And so thinking through these types of strategies in a slightly different way and then responding realistically to them, because right now just building more homes is not going to solve our crisis. We're going to need to also get to the distributional aspects of it, because, we built like 4,400 homes with almost $800 million. At the same time, 5,000 got turned into Airbnbs. So it's like we're spending money, we're building units, but we're worse off than we were when we started, right? And so we're going to need to deal with some of the like second homes, vacation rentals, but also private equities and like large corporate ownership of the housing stock right now.
What do you mean when you say deal with second homes, Airbnbs? Mm-hmm. I don't know what that means.
Yeah. So I think we need to increase the tax rate significantly on second homes and vacation rentals and more luxury estates. Like we have a regressive property tax structure right now, which puts a big burden on Vermonters who are living here all year round. So like my mom lives up in the Northeast Kingdom. And so during COVID, she lives on this small dirt road. All of the houses got bought up. And then after COVID, they left, but they kept them as vacation rentals or Airbnbs. So she's only got one neighbor who lives around her all year round now. And, for Vermont, we always talk about neighbors helping neighbors, community. And so that's really concerning. I mean, obviously as a daughter, but also just as a Vermonter. And so I think the last time we did the census, it was like 23% of our homes were vacant. It's estimated 75% of those are owned by like non-residents. So this is an important area for us to be able to use taxation not only as a way to generate revenue, but also discourage the use of properties as investments or as second homes and really try to prioritize rentals and like full-time ownership.
Do you really feel that the burden on average people like your mother, is that onerous, particularly since there's now been this element where it's based on income? It used to be before that, everybody paid property taxes, but now there's the income sensitivity. Hasn't that leveled the playing field?
No, for sure. And my mom personally is eligible for that because she's retired. The income sensitivity level has been reducing in recent years, actually, as costs of living have gone up. But even still, I think, property taxes have gone up 40% over the last 5 years. It's a lot for people. And I mean, the challenge I'm speaking to for my mom is even less about the property taxes, it's just community. She doesn't have community, right, where she's living. And so when you have so much of your town or your road or whatever, right, like not having people who are living there all year round to just look out for you, like that's like a larger, I would say, existential issue. But yeah, it also deals with the property tax issue too, because we do have to reduce property taxes. And I think it makes a lot more sense to do that through our property tax structure as opposed to the education spending.
Let's talk about education funding, because that's a big part of what property taxes are. You, as is your opponent in the Democratic primary, against you want to have voluntary consolidation, not mandatory consolidation. Vermont has these incredibly high per pupil costs. I guess, first of all, do you agree they're too high? $24,000 a year average for a student.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the major driver of rising education costs is healthcare and mental health support for kids. And so those two things need to be the focus in terms of reducing, again, getting to the root, because it's not just putting a burden on our state budgets, it's on businesses, for families, etc. But the mental health support for kids side too, I mean, I don't know why that's not more central to our discussion. Like, our kids are not doing well, and schools are taking on a lot of the burden of like supporting and providing that support to kids. And so, whether that's behavioral interventionalists, etc. And so that's the other side of it as well. We need to be taking, I think, a more holistic perspective and investing more actually in our teachers. I think it's less about, you know what I mean? Like, this is a time where we need to be investing more in education as opposed to less.
Do you think Vermont has an affordability crisis?
Yes, definitely. 100%. Yeah. I mean, before we started, I was talking about, right, like I'm a renter and I will just like doom scroll Zillow looking at houses in Stratford where I grew up that I would love to buy, but I'm never going to be able to afford because, I've got way too much student loan debt relative to my income, and the cost of housing is so high. Healthcare is so high. Like, our basic needs are really expensive right now. And in some ways, any crisis is an opportunity in some ways as well, because yes, everybody's talking about affordability, but it is important to be clear that not everything is unaffordable. It is our basic needs like healthcare and housing, energy, food. And that's because you can charge as much as you want for those types of things, and people have to pay it because you don't really have another option until you reach a breaking point. And I think we're at that option now, because I rent an apartment across from Battery Park, and a lot of my neighbors don't have an apartment at all, right? And so I'm the lucky one, even though my rent's gone up like $500 over the last 5 years. And so we're definitely in an affordability crisis, but it also provides us an opportunity to get back to the basics of like, okay, how do we ensure that everybody is like safe and secure in just like their basic needs? And some of that needs to come from focusing on distribution of those resources, and the other is also the production side of it, So I think we've been making huge strides, for example, with food being a really beautiful one where, we doubled local foods consumption in a decade, and we've now become, an inspiration for a lot of other states, and focusing more, on increasing food production, like focusing more on energy independence, right? Like increasing our renewable energy production so we're less dependent on imports of like oil and gas and Hydro-Quebec, et cetera. Feels this is an urgent moment to do that, bringing back, small town doctors who are in our communities who can provide that kind of care. We've always been a state that values some self-reliance, and I think this is a moment for us to really lean into that.
How is your rent going to go down in your apartment across the street from Battery Park? It isn't a single-family home. Mm-hmm. It's treated as a business. Mm-hmm. How would your rent go down? Mm-hmm. I mean, what you're talking about might very well increase the taxes on that home, which your landlord isn't going to do this as a charity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so my housing approach, I think we need to take a few different steps to really get to the root of the housing crisis that we're facing. And like the first is, like, because of how expensive homes are now, I think it was like only 92% of Vermonters aren't even eligible for a loan for the average new build house. So the only people who can afford to buy these are going to be investors or large corporate sort of property management companies.
Let me just stop you there. You said 92% are ineligible?
Ineligible,
Okay.
yeah. So only 8%
it.
of Vermonters are
Thank you.
eligible for a loan.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. And so that means, first and foremost, like we need to really limit private equity and corporate ownership of the housing stock right now, because otherwise they're the only ones who are going to be able to buy it, and they will maximize profits by definition of their aims for that ownership. The second part is what we just spoke about around increasing taxation on second homes, vacation rentals, luxury estates to reduce the property tax burden for, working class everyday Vermonters, and generating more revenue, which I think really needs to be prioritized into going into housing trusts, like cooperatives, and supporting people to build their own homes and renovate existing homes, because we have like the oldest housing stock in the country, and so a lot of it there's first-time home buyer incentives. There's no like first-time home builder incentives, right? And so like, how do you support people to build homes that they're going to live in for the rest of their life, as opposed to homes that they're trying to sell for profit on the market? And then we do have to deal with like rent stabilization or control, and I think that's something where we need to give that power back to our municipalities and towns to determine their own rent policies, because right now it's got to go through the legislature in order to have that charter change. And then last but definitely certainly not least is the cost of actual building is very expensive right now.
It is.
And that's a big part of it too. And so...
Is that in our control though? I mean, it seems as though cost of lumber, things like that are a global, really a global issue.
Yeah. And this is where, it'll take a little bit of time. One is we need to do a lot more vocational training, and I would say apprenticeship programs, because we don't have enough skilled builders, carpenters right now to meet the demand. But growing up in like Stratford, every single one of my friends' dads was a carpenter, but they all wanted us to go to college, right? Because like that was the understanding of like how we would have a better life. Now we all just have a bunch of student loan debt, but my sister was teaching at a VOTEC high school, and now she's a middle school teacher. But she was saying now, like, there's waiting lists, and kids come from all different walks of life to go to the VOTEC. But in the meantime, we have this missing generation. And so apprenticeship programs to learn from this older generation that is very skilled craftsmen and make sure we're passing that information and skill along, I think, is one side of it. And the other is to produce more of our own building materials ourselves as well. Because you're right, we import a lot from Canada right now, and because of tariffs and, geopolitical relations, I think it's important that we start investing more in the production of those materials ourselves.
Do we need more people in Vermont?
I think we definitely need to be prepared for more people in Vermont. And I think the best way to prepare for more people in Vermont is to make sure the people who are here are like good, because just thinking that if we bring in more people or more investment or, that's going to be the source of our prosperity, like that's been the dominant economic development philosophy for decades. And that hasn't been working, it's still based on kind of this like trickle down economic sort of logic. And so I'm a big proponent, and in my work, I've always focused a lot more on like bottom up economic development, like look at what is already working here and how do you invest in our small businesses, in our own industries, in our communities as the source of our prosperity, and keep more money circulating within our local economies to create those multipliers, as opposed to having it flow immediately out to some corporate offshore bank account, that kind of approach. And I think if we can ensure everybody's good here, that will be the best foundation we can have to be able to have more people, because more people will come as a result of like climate change, as a result of like we're getting a lot of political refugees already here, and we need to be a welcoming place for others. And that requires, I think, people feeling secure in the first place.
Let's talk about the work you've done. You've been with this organization, Wellbeing Economy Alliance, whose objective is, and I'm quoting here, shift economic priorities away from endless GDP growth toward a model that delivers shared social justice and a healthy planet. How would that, well, first of all, give me an example of work that your organization has done globally or here at home that would give me some idea what that very highfalutin description would mean on the ground?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, maybe one of our claims to fame at We All is we helped to create the Wellbeing Economy Governments Partnership. And that includes currently New Zealand, Iceland, Finland, Scotland, Wales, and Canada. And the first 3 countries who founded it were all had female heads of state, which I don't think is a coincidence. So just shout out to some feminine leadership here. But all of them have committed, and I would say recognized, that economic growth coming with a lot more inequality or like environmental insecurity, political insecurity is like not progress, right? Like we need to be clear on what it is as a society we're trying to achieve. And so the way that they've been going about doing that, one of my favorite examples is the country of Wales in the UK, where they went through a process of asking their citizens, like, what kind of Wales do you want to leave for your children and grandchildren? And on that basis, they articulated these 7 long-term well-being goals, which were centered in health and equity, community, culture, global responsibility, biodiversity, and prosperity. And what they did is they set very clear 25-year targets, so for the next generation, and they required all of government to work collectively towards those targets and instituted a Future Generations Commissioner who's semi-autonomous, whose tenure is always longer than any political administration or cycle, to hold the government to account. So what that looks like in practice was that when they wanted to build a new highway through the country, for example, they had to make the case for how it would contribute to all 7 goals. And when they couldn't make the case for contributing to any of the goals, except for maybe one, they put a permanent freeze on all new road building. So all that money would go into public transportation and active travel instead, which they could see clearly supporting a healthier, more equitable, globally responsible, et cetera, Wales, right? And so the goals we set matter because they become the ways in which we evaluate not just our economy, but also our government's success. And I would say right now, it's very unclear to me what our government is trying to achieve. Like we are reacting to stuff, and I wouldn't even say the right stuff. And so we need to be clear on like, what is it that we are trying to achieve as a society, and then make sure our economy and our government is delivering on that.
You gave a concrete example a couple of minutes ago about buying more having more building material come indigenously from Vermont. Give me another idea or two that would be along those lines and what you were just talking about in terms of what happened in Wales.
In terms of like economic policies? Yeah. So I mean, right now, the way that I believe we need to go through a participatory process in Vermont of articulating those goals and having everybody, really identify them. But for me, as I've been developing my policy platform, like whenever I ask Vermonters what it is they love about Vermont and living here, it's always our communities, right? Like neighbors helping neighbors and our natural beauty. It's like our mountains and rivers and working lands. And so that has been my North Star as I've been trying to think about different types of economic policies. Like, is it good for our communities and is it good for our environment? And so that's why with the healthcare policy, for example, it's like bringing small town doctors back to our communities is good for community, right? Or similarly, one of the things I think Vermont can be a leader in the green economy of the future, where we can, there's a bill that's meant to be passed where in the EU that will require any product that enters in the EU to have certain like durability, reuse, repairability standards. In Vermont, we already have a lot of businesses that have like lifetime warranties, for example, like Darn Tough Socks or Burton Snowboards, right? And there's not a market incentive for that, but they believe in that because durability, and repairability. We have, businesses like Bar Hill Gin, whose mission is to support pollinator regeneration, and their like production of the gin is a circular production process. They take like the heat from the distillation to like heat their building. And so I believe that we can be the leaders of like a more circular and regenerative production system, economy of the future, because we have that ethos here already. And so strategically really supporting that kind of entrepreneurship and innovation, I think can ensure we create really good jobs for the future and do it in a way that is aligned with our planetary constraints and boundaries.
How would you get everybody's opinion and get a consensus on what you're talking about?
Like in
Vermont?
Yeah. I mean, we already have this incredible tradition of town meeting, right? So direct democracy is not something new to Vermont. And so the idea is, you go through a process of asking all Vermonters, like, what kind of Vermont do we want to leave for our children and grandchildren? And, in Wales, the way that they did it is that they had a lot of community conversations. They had surveys. They had their own sort of celebrity ambassador, Michael Sheen, to like sort of make it cool, and went to a lot of different public spaces where they would like engage people and get their input. And so you need a mixed method. I think we already have some incredible organizations like the Vermont Council for Rural Development, like the community visits approach that they take, for example. They have, like, they would be an incredible partner, for example, in helping to roll out something like this. But even prior to running the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Vermont, like, this is a coalition of a lot of different networks and organizations in the state, including the Vermont Council for Rural Development and Sustainable Jobs Fund, the Gun Institute at UVM, et cetera. And so we've already been trying to advance this type of vision. We brought the first Future Generations Commissioner from Wales to meet with our legislature, organizing community conversations all around the state to get a better sense of like what is it that we really value, what matters for a good life, and where do we see examples of that already being practiced. Because I think that's a big part of it. It's like where the solutions are already here. I believe that. And like pieces of this different system are already here. And it's just about how do we make them the central player as opposed to the anomaly.
You mentioned a couple of times you're from Stratford. Do you know Noah Kahn well enough to make him the celebrity ambassador for this initiative?
I know. I'm working on it. My sister babysat him, but he's a few years younger than me, so I don't know him personally. But we put out the bat signal in Stratford, and so I'm hoping, because he also just, I think, put out an interview talking about the need for universal health care and mental health support. So hopefully he will. Yeah. I know he's very busy and just released an album and documentary and stuff like that. So we're just going to have to get through the noise, but hopefully get on his radar.
Why are young people struggling so much?
Oh, my goodness. Like with just
loneliness.
Yeah.
There's this whole, idea of particularly young men who are just kind of drifting and this fear of kind of a lost generation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do you think that's happening?
Oof. I mean, we could talk about this, what I mean, for days, and I would love to, Mark. But, I mean, I can speak from my own personal experience, right? I mentioned in the beginning where, I've always been an optimistic person. I was just sort of born that way. And then last year, I really did. I felt a hopelessness that I think is pretty pervasive within my generation, the sense that, there's no point in even planning on anything because there's so many different compounding crises that are on us. There's, not just the affordability crisis of like, we're never going to be able to buy a home or pay off our student loan debt or, have a retirement. Like but then at the same time, it's like in the midst of the climate crisis, fascism, AI, financial pending collapse. Like there's so many changes that I feel like are happening to us. And I think honestly, we're all still kind of traumatized from COVID. I think our nervous systems are dysregulated. We're in a state of fight or flight. And I think the healing comes from recognizing the types of changes we can choose, as opposed to just feeling like we are victims of all of these changes that are beyond our control. And so if that's from my own perspective, I can say, I was choosing to run for governor has been very helpful in terms of like calming some of this existential dread. And I would say for my team, and I would say also the level of reception and enthusiasm for the campaign is an indication of the moment we're in. Like we've had over 600 people sign up to volunteer, and I think it's because we're all yearning to be part of something that feels proactive and not just reactive right now, something that feels really hopeful and transformative, that like gives us a sense of agency that whatever we do now will determine the course of history, and like we're born for a reason right now, and let's live up to that responsibility, I guess, and be part of doing whatever we can to make the change. But otherwise, if we're not engaged, I think it can feel pretty crushing and overwhelming right now.
So what's your message to young people?
It's, the way to beat the despair is through action. I think we got to get involved in whatever way. I think everybody's got a gift and a passion to offer to the world right now. And it does require, I think we're all going to have to be aggressively generous right now and step up with our skills, our time, our resources, whatever it is that you have, because that's how we're going to get through this. I think the other side of it, a big principle for my campaign is fun. I think there's some of the culture building work that we need right now. Like MAGA's got a culture, and the left is kind of a buzzkill right now sometimes. And so like, how do we center more like music and like breweries and farmers and like fun events that like bring people together in a way that feels joyful but also powerful, so no matter what, we're better connected and organized and prepared for what's coming. And I think that shift is happening. But like, let's make it really fun to be part of a movement for justice right now.
Okay, at the risk of being a buzzkill.
Yeah.
So, I've heard a lot of politicians over the years talk about this idea of, keeping money locally.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had great success with farmers markets.
Mm-hmm.
But, frankly, farmers market food is more expensive than what you get at Hannaford's.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of people who are not well off that can't participate in that. So is that idea of, really keeping money local realistic given most people's economic situation?
Yeah. And this is the issue, right? Where the point is, if, let's say, I go to a farmer's market and, I buy some of the, let's say, milk or something, and they, use that dollar to pay for some hay from a local farmer, right? Like, who then uses that dollar to spend it at the local general store. Like, you've just created $4 out of $1.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
Like, más o menos, right? But the point there is that you are actually raising the spending capacity of others through that process. So it's not just that like the things are going to be more expensive, but over time, the spending power of people will be more too through that process of keeping it. And the government can play an important role in supporting that, even if it's just through public procurement. Because right now, like, our public procurement system definitely preferences bigger players. But 99% of our businesses are small businesses. 72% are just sole proprietors, like self-employed people. And so it's really swapped. Like, we need to make it much easier to be able to source from much smaller actors to help build that demand for their services, and to also create greater linkages like across our supply chains here to help support that multiplier effect.
Okay, buzzkill question number 2. So, a lot of people that have Airbnbs, this is an important source of income for them.
Yeah.
They're not a big, giant corporation. Tourism is one of the 3 legs on the Vermont economic stool right now. Don't you risk jeopardizing one of those 3 key legs by taxing at a high rate things like Airbnbs?
Yeah. And it's true, right? I mean, this is a lot of the problem of our whole system, right? Like, we are part of the system we are suffering from too, And so the reality is, because wages have been so stagnant for a lot of folks who have been able to afford it, their homes or their rentals or Airbnbs are their like retirement plans, right? Or they're subsidizing their income through that. And so are equally bought in to this existing system that is, we're all
capitalist driven.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, in this, I think there is the immediate sort of like, and I get that personal sort of fears, but then there's also the broader, like, everybody I talked to is really worried about young people not being able to stay here.
Yeah.
Right. They don't, like, their kids aren't going to like want to move back, but they can't afford to, etc. And I think that there's a broader call here, but also just practically, the thing is, they might have to pay more for their Airbnb, but their primary property tax will go down. So it will be pretty much the same for them financially, right? And so that's the point too. It's like shifting the burden from the homeowners who live here all year round to folks who, if you can afford to have, you know what I mean, like a secondary or Airbnb, I think you can afford to pay more.
But, you know, talking about capitalism, do you think Vermonters are ready to elect somebody who really wants to challenge the capitalist system?
I mean, we'll find out, but it seems like it, you know? I mean, and I don't even know it's so much about like challenging the capitalist system as just like building on the Vermont economy that is actually here. I think so often, you know, we've looked to the outside as a source of our prosperity. And this is about like getting back to the basics. Like one of my favorite documents, and I would love for us to do this another time, updated is like 2008, I think Paul Costello and his team did this value survey of Vermont.
Yeah.
Like, what are the core values that Vermonters share? And one of them is smallness. We like small business, small towns, small schools, small government, etc. Another is, you know, self-reliance, you know, like a certain level of we're handy, we know how to build stuff, fix stuff, grow stuff. Tolerance, right? Like of being tolerant of one another, regardless of identity or political persuasion. And then Vermont. That was a core value. We love Vermont. Everybody loves Vermont. And I think this is a moment where, yeah, like my hope really does stand with states right now of standing up relative to the federal government, but also illustrating a different political and economic system is possible. Because the crisis of democracy we're seeing is a reflection of the crisis in our economy. When you have this level of inequality and precarity, when people don't feel valued, safe, or secure, they will accept authoritarian, you know, solutions as a recipe for redemption. And so we have to get to the economic foundations that are necessary for a flourishing democracy and society. And I think everybody's feeling that. And I mean, whether or not we call this like capitalism or whatever system right now, because it's really our economy is just controlled by a handful of multinational corporations who are controlled by an even smaller group of private equity funds. Like that is not a competitive system, right? Like we have allowed for such levels of like accumulation of wealth and power that ultimately we have to illustrate a different system by getting back to basics again, right? Like what are the core needs and how do we produce those things for one another in a way that's like equitable and sustainable?
I have to ask, because you're sort of leading me to this next question. I did see a comment that you made looking at some of the talks that you've given. No billionaires. So how do you make that happen?
No billionaires?
Yeah.
I mean, well, I think we only have one billionaire in Vermont, right? Like this is
that's true.
Yeah. So I mean,
but I'm talking about just on a broader level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and my point around billionaires, I think what's important is like I think it's hard to sometimes even conceptualize of how much money that is. But like 1 million seconds is about 11 days. 1 billion seconds is about 32 years, right? So, I mean, we're talking about an absurd amount of money that you would never be able to spend in your lifetime. And at that point, it's really much more about power. And when you allow for that level of wealth to accumulate, then comes corruption and undue political influence. And so it's, again, bad for democracy. It's bad for the economy. It's distorting of our economic systems. And so some of it is, at this point, like we need stronger antitrust legislation. Like we need to break up a lot of these big companies and like private equity firms. And we need higher taxation and redistribution. But really, ideally, the type of work I've always been working on is how do you actually build an economy that is more equitable by design. So you don't have to wait for the government to tax and redistribute, but by having more like cooperatives and employee-owned businesses, small businesses, like public benefit corporations, etc., you reduce the need for as much of that tax and like after the fact, the government coming in and trying to fix the damage. And so being more intentional about like how do we build a more equitable economy that prevents that level of wealth accumulation from happening in the first place because it is being distributed amongst workers and society in a more just manner.
You've done work overseas. You mentioned a few minutes back that you've been living in Burlington for 5 years. Is that?
Yeah, I moved to Burlington in 2018 originally, and then I left for like almost a year, and then came back again in 2020.
So there wouldn't be any question about the 4-year residency requirement in order to run for governor?
No.
And if some pesky reporter tried to, or one of your political opponents did research, you'd be able to satisfy that?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I've been back for a while. And yeah, I mean, born and raised here, so Vermonter through and through.
Yeah, I mean, you could be born and raised here, but you need, you know the requirement.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I think like a lot of folks my age, right? Like we grow up here, we go out in search of professional opportunity, and then we realize Vermont's the best.
Right.
Right? I know. This is what I always say to people when they're really worried about young people staying. I was like, we're kind of like the Amish, you got to let them go. And like, if they come back, we will. And hopefully we can just make it a lot easier for us to be able to stay.
When I say AI, AI is fill in the blank.
The greatest existential threat we're facing right now.
More than the climate?
I mean, I think in the short term, I think they're both like incredibly existential. I think the climate, AI, I think we can do something about and need to more urgently right now. For me, and I should be honest, like I'm a little bit of a Luddite. So sometimes when there's these new technological innovations, I'm like, oh, I just sort of ignore it for a bit. And then last year I was noticing so many of my colleagues using it, friends using it as a therapist, etc. So I was like, okay, we got to look into this a lot deeper to understand what's going on. And for me, like when the supposed godfather of AI, the creator of it, uses his Nobel Prize speech for the development of AI to call for the stop of its development and for major regulation of it, because right now, like theoretically, AI could be used for positive public purposes. But within our current economic system, it's going to be used for private profit maximization. And we're seeing it being used in warfare, right? Like in terms of cybersecurity. Ultimately, the aim of it is to replace all workers in order for it to be profitable, which would ultimately mean you could end up with like 5 guys controlling pretty much the whole economy, which is also terrifying on its own. But then you have AGI, right? Like the aim for it to have its own genuine intelligence. And we're already seeing that with like AI is starting to do its own things without being asked. Like it won't shut off, even if you want it to. It's like blackmailing people if it gets a sense through emails or whatever that it's going to be potentially turned off. It's hacking into systems that it wasn't told to. And so that itself, again. But I will say the positive side of it for me, I've heard different statistics, but like 80% of Americans are strongly in favor of serious regulation of AI. And like, when have 80% of Americans agreed on anything? You know what I mean? Like that is a really good sign, despite its convenience, because it is convenient, right? Like for research or analysis, etc., people see and feel that it is a major threat. And so the fact that the federal government has been trying to stop states from regulating, from being able to regulate, shows that we have a lot more power right now than we might realize. And so big shout out to Monique Priestley in her continuous fight, to get Vermont to be a leader in a lot of this tech regulation space, because I think that that's going to be a really important area for us to be a leader.
Well, I heard a speech she gave that was terrifying in terms of the ability of, you have no private information anymore at all.
Yeah.
Why would a Democrat vote for you over Allie Richards, who has a track record of getting this historic child care change put through?
Yeah, I mean, I think because of my background, my expertise is much more as like an economist and in economic policy. So to the extent to which I think the major crises we're facing right now for people, I mean, as I said, like everybody's talking about affordability, and that is fundamentally looking at the structure of our economy and the price of basic needs. That's something I know how to do, and I think that's the sort of work that we need right now. But obviously, it's great that we've got two cool ladies, taking on Phil Scott right now.
That wraps it up for this edition of 802 News, sponsored by Red Hen Baking Company. Thanks for listening.